This is a fan-generated show. If you'd like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our new Rumble channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Good evening. Welcome to the Glazov Gang. Tonight, Unraveling the Bible Code. With us this evening, Professor Eliyahu Rips, an Israeli mathematician who is an expert on Bible code, the coded messaging and the Hebrew text of the Torah. Professor Rips, what an honor and a privilege to have you on the show.
Thank you. A good evening.
Thank you so much for joining us. Professor Rips, you're an incredible man. We have something I don't even know if we can find words to describe this, but it's an incredible, fascinating subject, to say the least. Before we get to the Bible codes and your research, let's just talk about you for a little while. You have a fascinating background. So tell us a little bit about your Latvian origin, and a lot of your family members also died in the Holocaust. Just give us a little bit of your background.
I was born in Riga, Latvia in 1948, which means after the Second World War. My late mother, blessed memory, came from a family that lived in Latvia, or before it was made a part of the former Soviet Union. When the war broke out, for the Russia in June 22, with the German invasion, on June 30, the Germans were already at the gates of Riga. Then whoever was able started to flee deep inside Russia. Half of the member of the family of my mother succeeded to escape, and they were what it was evacuatia deep inside Russia. The other half didn't managed to escape, and they all perished in Riga ghetto. This is on the part of my late mother. My late father was from Belarus. He was, before the war, a teacher of mathematics. When the war started, he was mobilized to the Soviet army, and he went with the army until he was put off also in Riga with the Soviet troops. Now he learned that all his family perished while Germans occupied Belarus, including his wife and a 3-year-old daughter. So he had no reason to return there. He stayed in Riga. He married my mother, and so I was born. This is the story of my family.
Professor Rips, our heart goes out to you for the suffering and the loss. So out of your 9 siblings, you're the only one that survived?
No. It is in the family of my mother.
Oh, I see.
Of them survived and half of them did not. Who managed to escape from the Germans at the beginning of the war did survive. Who didn't manage to escape didn't survive.
Right. Okay. Our hearts go out to you, Professor Rips. Now, you were raised in the Soviet climate, and so you had an atheist upbringing, and religion, of course, was persecuted. Judaism was persecuted. So our Creator was not introduced to you in your youth, right? Because of Soviet-imposed atheism.
Actually, this topic was just never mentioned, never occurred, never discussed.
So you have quite a fascinating story on this level, because maybe we'll get to it later, hopefully, because you came to Judaism from disbelief and then you entered belief. This is a quite also an incredible story, right?
Yes, because actually this component just didn't exist in my life then.
Okay, well, what did exist is that you were very well aware of the totalitarian nature of the regime and the system that you were growing up in. And in
Not then, much later.
much later, right, I understand. And so, with the invasion of Czechoslovakia, you had learned of the self-immolation of the Czechoslovak student Jan Palach, if I'm pronouncing it right. And then, as a graduate student in the University of Latvia, you yourself, in protest against the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia, you yourself attempted a self-immolation. You lit yourself on fire. Can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, but actually the story starts with the spring of Prague.
Mm-hmm.
Because then in the early 1968, there was incredible news from the then Czechoslovakia. Suddenly, the things started to change there. There was the free speech was no more censored now, and many people started to speak their mind. And more interesting that the Czechoslovakian leadership tried to encourage all these things. And it was incredible because it was just the communist leaders of Czechoslovakia that led this Prague Spring. But then gradually the Soviet system become more and more angered by this development, and one could start fearing about what will happen further. Now, towards the summer, it was a very big room to be afraid what is going to happen. By the way, I was then a student in the fourth course of mathematics in the University of Riga. Then by the then Soviet system, actually, we had 1 day of military training in a week, what's called Военная кафедра. And after we ended this year, we all were sent into the Soviet army for 3 months, just in the summer in camps. And then we were supposed to obtain the military grade, mladший lieutenant, the sub-lieutenant. Now, and then our camps happened to be near Kaliningrad, the former Königsberg place. And then I saw that the Soviet troops that are placed there were all in motion. So from this moment, I was extremely pessimistic because I saw that the troops are preparing to invade. I could observe it just with my eyes. Then it turned out that when it came to the August 21, then the Soviet troops went, including those we stayed with, in Czechoslovakia. But the authorities wisely did not take with them this group of students. So we returned to Riga. And we sit there until all this event developed. And we could only read in the newspapers the infinite screed of the hand of, as to say, of the brothers they stretched to save the Czechoslovakian nation. And after all, we returned to learn the next, we returned to other mathematical studies, and that's all. So it was a very, very gloomy time, and nothing could be done on just nothing could be done. You see, when you happen to be in Riga and to went to the street in summer, you see that something incredible, the feast of every face. Every person you see there is for somehow happy. Then we come in autumn, in the same place, every face is as is at the cemetery. And that's all. You cannot do something about this to say, I'm not in my name. Count me out. I cannot do even the slightest protest because this means immediately to ruin everything in your life. So we just continue to study mathematics of all these endless months.
And Professor, when you set yourself on fire, were you not afraid to die? Did you believe in the afterlife? Where did you get this courage? Were you not afraid to have done this?
No, it is quite the opposite. I was afraid to make a usual protest because if I'm going to oppose a protest, inevitably in the end of the day, I will be in the hand of KGB. So then it seemed to me less fearful to die as to be in their hands.
I see. Well, Professor Rips, you survived that. This is an incredible story. You're an incredible human being. Thank you so much for standing up for freedom under this awful Soviet evil empire. And you ended up, of course, the KGB had interrogated you. You were incarcerated for 2 years, if I'm correct. But then there was, your story had become known. There were petitions on your behalf. You were freed in 1971, and then the following year you were allowed to immigrate to Israel. And so you came to Israel, you completed your PhD, you started studying mathematics, you were a professor in the Department of Mathematics at Hebrew University. Sorry if I'm speeding this up very quickly here. Now, tell us a little bit about being an atheist, arriving in Israel, and how you gradually entered faith.
Yes, sorry, I would like only to insert one phrase. I was freed mostly because of the efforts of the great Vladimir Bukovsky.
He was a great friend of our family.
Because then, after a half year in Riga prison, I was moved to the psychiatric ward in Riga. And you see, I'm not able to stand this trial because I'm diagnosed with вялотекущая schizophrenia, slow-moving schizophrenia, and until it improves. But then the heroic struggle of Vladimir Bukovsky give an impetus to free me and some other prisoners of the psychiatric ward. So I will forever gratitude to Vladimir Bukovsky, and I happy that can express it now. So to your question, I moved to Israel. Then we had a crash course in Hebrew, very intensive. So in the end of the year, I was able to speak more or less fluent Hebrew. Then I resumed my PhD studies at the Hebrew University. You see, I was almost 5 years in the Riga. Then I was accepted in Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and I started my PhD studies. And then we moved to Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, more or less for the first time in my life, I discovered that there are observant Jews. Maybe there were observant Jews in Riga, but I didn't notice them because I never was in the quarters I possibly could meet them. In any case, in Jerusalem, they were everywhere. So it was primarily the object of my curiosity, what it is about. And also I have a friend that also was moved to Judaism. We try to discuss it, to think about this, and I become attracted, not on the intellectual side, like a kind of a romantic wave. And quite in few months, I find myself unexpectedly observing some basic commandments. All this while continuing my study in the Hebrew University of Mathematics.
Very fascinating. Professor Rips, when you arrived in Israel, did you feel that you had come home in a way? Was there something familiar to your soul and to your spirit there?
No. Actually, what most interested me earlier and then was mathematics. But I noticed what is going on, and my curiosity was invoked. And then even there was also a group of religious students in Hebrew University. I was attracted, and I cannot explain precisely why, but in the course of a few months, I became a beginning observant Jew.
Okay, so Professor Rips, so you begin to read Torah, read Hebrew, and all of a sudden you began to see with your own eyes certain encoded messages in the Torah and in the divine document that's miraculously structured. Tell us a little bit about this, and we're going to try our best to kind of try to keep this understandable to our audience. But go ahead. So how did you begin to make these discoveries?
It was more complex. Just when you see, you have to understand the mass of my innocence. I never read before the Torah. And then I started to read it. And
right.
While already being observing. Then I see the Torah tells me things that I just cannot believe. The crossing of the Red Sea, the elevation of Mount Sinai, these are obvious miracles. But I was taught and I believed that there cannot be miracles. If somebody tells you about a miracle, it just is a sign that this story cannot be trusted, because we scientifically know, the science revealed to us that there are no miracles, that there possibly could not be miracles, because in the observable world, they're only under the rule of immutable, blind laws of physics, and nothing else beyond this. And because we are not taught this at the lessons of ideology, then I would just abhor it. But in the lessons of science, and this I believed. So I was in a contradiction between my own behavior and what I'm told in the Torah, that I would like with all my heart to believe it, but I knew that it could not possibly be. So what to do? I have to think out all situation, because it becomes very urgent to me to understand what is going on.
Right. And Professor Rips, so with your mathematical brilliance, you began there. It's sort of like a word search puzzle. There's meaningful phrases and sentences that begin to unfold when you begin to rearrange the text in some way, right? When you look at it, when they're skipping words and letters, right?
Actually, it was in much lower steps. The first step was that I tried to see whether miracles are possible in principle. Could this be reconciled in the scientific view of the world? And after much thinking, the answer was that, it was not difficult to me to believe that there is a creator of the world, as such it doesn't contradict any known facts about the world. But then, logically, if the Creator created the world, then it stands above the world.
Right. I read a fascinating interview with you where you said that if God created the laws, then he himself can step outside and above the laws when he so chooses, right?
Yes, exactly. I'm repeating the same thoughts because this was the way I started to thinking. But if then he stands above the laws, so he can suspend them at his will and resume it also at his will. And then we inside the world will see this as a miracle. I mean that the course of the flow of the laws of physics will be suspended for some time. So at least what does it? So we can think that there is no logical contradiction. It doesn't prove that this really happened, but it says it is not contradictory to think of this as it happened. And before it, I was taught that it is impossible to think this could be happened. So we have now intellectual draw. I cannot prove that this is, they cannot prove that it is not.
Right. And how this is connected to this specific topic is that the text of the Hebrew Torah is miraculously structured. The Torah is itself a miracle, right?
So let me say, because this was also a number of steps. This I described the first step. Now it seemed fairly simple, but why it took me a lot of thinking, very difficult, until I arrived to this simple thing after all. Because before it, I did know this argument, but it seemed to me a stretch, something we do because we're in impossible situation. So now we have a draw. Then the next question is, does there exist positive evidence of all these miracles that happened, that were told in the so now started the search for positive evidence. And then I tried to look in various books that describe hints in the Torah until I finally arrived at the book written by the students of the late Rabbi Michael Dov Weizmandel. And they described this idea of skipping letters and reading the Torah, skipping the letters. From this book, I arrived to the idea, and then it's immediately clear that one should continue the search using the power of the computer. So in this way started this computerized search for the hints of the Torah.
So with the help of a computer and to put in a certain code, one of the things is if you begin to skip certain letters, other messages begin to come forward, right?
No, it is also much more difficult. When you try to search the Torah using the skipping of letters, you are overwhelmed of the ocean of information that you do not understand. So just you don't know what to do about it. Then we're trying to trace some meaningful patterns. So from this point on, it was a search for meaningful patterns, and then you try to impose certain filters on the reality and see whether you could obtain a meaningful picture. And this is how this search developed.
Fascinating. And in terms of the search that you had developed,
and other people, I was not alone. Not more, a group of people from everyone from each point of view did this search also.
Right. And collectively with these experts, you began to find that the Torah contained detailed descriptions of future events and modern events. Am I correct?
Yes. Now, actually, this major breakthrough should be credited to my fellow Doron Witztum. Doron Witztum, he was earlier a PhD student in physics. He was also attracted to Jewish religion. And then when he learned about this Torah code research, he made very important advances. One of these is memorable to me forever. In the middle of the 80s, he showed a picture when the word Vilna Goen appears together in a way that is a very small probability to this for happen by chance. To say that I was fascinating is not the word. Actually, I was overwhelmed by this. So now we had a direct evidence that Torah has an encoding that is related to events of our near future, because the famous Vilna Goen have lived in the 18th century, so more than 200 years ago. So it is named to be inserted in advance for thousands years in advance in the text of the Torah. For months, I cannot imagine I exist. It was something, am I dreaming or not? This was my reaction, because now we have a positive evidence that Torah is miraculous. I say, in the real life miracle.
But Professor Ripp, somebody had to have written the Torah themselves. So the encoder himself was divinely inspired and God was speaking through them, right?
So actually, according to the Jewish tradition, Torah was given to Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu, when Jews they went out of Egypt, and during this course of 40 years until Jews entered Eretz Israel. And Moshe was just a scribe, not an author, just he wrote as one says letter by letter, he was writing what he was told to write. So he was not an author, it was not an inventor, it was a scribe of the Torah. This is what the Jewish tradition says. And then, from this point of view, one have to say that all this was divinely developed, and then the text was in such a way that all these hints are pre-inserted in it.
In order for this program to work and to have a discussion here, we're going to have to leave most of this miraculous way in terms of the code for our audience to research and to look you up. You've got many, many interviews, especially on Rumble with our good friend Lowell, and I've been watching them, and we can't cover everything in this amount of time, but we're doing our best here. Now, Professor Rips, am I correct? I'm a little bit overwhelmed by some of the things that I've read. Is it true that the names of Stalin, Hitler, Mengele in some ways appeared inside the text when the code was put into effect?
Stalin, yes. Hitler, yes. But I don't recall Mengele. But maybe as an illustration, I will tell you the story of one single table, which is number 3 of the list that I sent you.
Okay, so the third table you sent us, we'll put it up.
So let me tell, this table is about the Czech student Jan Palach, who committed self-immolation in January 1969 in the protest against the invasion of Soviet Union to Czechoslovakia, also the troops of the Warsaw Pact. And he died 3 days later, and his funeral was the first great public protest against the invasion. Now, it happened that in 2009, it was 40 years later, I was invited to Czechoslovakia, to Prague, and by the Institute of the Study of Totalitarian Regimes, that are historians in Prague. And I spent very nice people. I spent a few days with them, and then I returned back. I thought, why didn't ask in Torah codes from Jan Palach? So I did it. So I just checked the word Jan Palach, and then it turned out that around the place in the table which has the name of Jan Palach, we had his story. It says, a Czech will commit suicide. A Czech will ignite the fire in protest against the occupiers. So all these words in Hebrew appeared on this table in a way that I could measure their statistical significance. And when we take all these procedures together, it is much better than 1 to a billion. So there is no question that this is statistically significant. Just the story of Jan Palach is actually told in the Torah codes.
That's absolutely amazing. And the late author Michael Drosnin, I think, also found within the Hebrew text the prophecy of the assassination of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. Am I correct?
Absolutely. I can't tell you the whole story. In the spring of 1994, I was a visiting professor at the University of Columbia, New York. And then Michael Drosnin, who is a New Yorker, he is a reporter, came to me and showed me the picture that the unique appearance of Yitzhak Rabin with Torah codes crosses the verse, the assassin that will assassinate. So he showed me this picture, and then he gave his opinion that this might be a prediction of the possible assassination of Rabin. I must say, I didn't agree with him. I see it, maybe it only says that Rabin and assassination are somehow connected, but not necessarily it predicts the future assassination of Rabin. In any case, Michael Drosnin, unfortunately, the late Michael Drosnin was an active person. He wrote a letter to Rabin. He wrote a letter to Israeli security. He was sure that these letters will land in the dustbin. So what did he? He wrote a letter to an Israeli poet, Chaim Guri, that happens to be a friend of Rabin. He came to Israel. He spoke with Chaim Guri until he convinced him to go to Rabin as a personal friend who could reach the prime minister. And then the message reached it. What they did do with this, I don't know. Now, a year and a half later, in the late autumn of 1995, Rabin was indeed assassinated. This is another story. And so this prediction came true. And then, after all, Michael Drosnin had a prima facie case to write his book, because it is based on the true story as he, Drosnin, have discovered the huge assassination of Rabin, predicted a known year and a half in advance.
Well, I'm very humbled listening to this. It's very, very overwhelming. And I also agonize how to spend these treasurable moments with you and what to ask. Let me switch over for a second. These are all interconnected with our main topic. Professor Rips, could you speak a little bit on the mystery of innocent suffering? because of the Holocaust, of Gulag Archipelago, of all the suffering in our world, how do we as believers in a Creator understand innocent suffering and the triumph of evil, at least temporarily? We know God wins in the end, but how evil triumphs for this time period.
One thing that I learned from my childhood, to accept this as it is. The world is a place of terrible suffering. I remember as a little boy, I read the protocols of the Nuremberg trials and all these naturalistic descriptions of what people went in the concentration camps, and so much of them died, and also died in my own family. So the thought was to accept it, just to accept it. I have no other way to counter it. There is suffering in the world. There is huge suffering in the world. If you look what happened in the 20th century alone, there is a long, big martyrology in many places, in all continents, for millions of people that went astray, just if you know the facts. Once, for example, the second example is the Ukrainian Holodomor. I have one book by Robert Conquest, is a great terror. The other book is The Harvest of Sorrow, that describes the imaginable suffering what happened then with the absolutely innocent people, plain peasants that were made to die of starvation in the planned way, which is proven by the later research. So this is the world around us, and the explanation will come later. It is not in our hands. We have just to accept it.
And Professor Rips, what is in our hands, you know, I've been following you and reading your interviews, just fascinating, and you deal with this issue quite a bit, that the Torah stresses that the world depends on our actions, that everything that's happening in the world is determined by what we do. And so it's very important for every human being to conduct themselves properly and in a good way. It's all interwoven, right?
Yes, it depends only, or it is depending also what we do, also by we. We are not the only influencers, but it depends also of us.
Mm-hmm. And Professor Rips, you've also talked about how there's no such thing as coincidence and chance, at least in one context. And there's this mystery of predestination and our own free will. And you've talked about that it's not necessarily predestination, but even in these Bible codes, that everything is foreseen, that time doesn't necessarily travel in a straight line, that our Creator already knows everything that is going to happen. I don't even really know what I'm asking here, but I want to give this to you. Can you speak a little bit about our own free will, and yet our Creator already knows everything that we're going to do?
Yes, this is a well-known paradox, because we actually do have the free will, as everyone experiences it. We also, now when we know that everything is, I don't know, say predestined, but it is known in advance. This is not the same, known in advance. We are not robots, we are not automata. We have our own volition and our own responsibility. Nevertheless, the Creator knows how we will choose. This is another thing. Actually, even the sages of Mishnah stressed this seeming contradiction. Everything is known in advance and the free will is given. So this is a real kind of a living paradox. Now, I cannot solve it. It is a classic paradox, but I can make it less frightening, as to say. So, for example, if we today see the translation of a game was yesterday, so we already know what will happen. On the 21st minute, he will go further and he will score a goal. Right moment. I'm asking. So when we see it, we already know what is going to happen. I'm asking, our present day knowledge, does it prevent the players on the field yesterday? Obviously not, because our knowledge is in the future towards the players on the field. We are just divided by time interval. We are in the present, they are in the past. So our present knowledge does not interfere with their then action. But this is just a time interval. Now, with respect to the Almighty, so we are all in his hands. Just the whole world is. So we are inside the world. He has a unified look on the world from the outside. And then our free will doesn't conflict with the pre-existing knowledge of the Creator, because it's outside the world. So we are inside the world. The knowledge of it outside the world. So they do not disturb this one to other. I do not pretend I solve the paradox. It's deeper than this. At least I try to soothe it.
Yeah. Professor Rips, are you sure that God exists?
It much more than I exist.
Wow. Now, have you ever, after you became religious, did you ever doubt God's existence? Or, as in Brothers Karamazov, Ivan is very angry at God. He believes in God, but he returns the ticket because of innocent suffering. Was there ever a time, perhaps, that you doubted God, or that you were a little bit angry in some way with him?
Chas v'shalom. The question is, when I finally accepted the idea and I explained the way that I came to this expectation, so it was, I'm sorry, it is unquestionable. It is, let me just, maybe the comparison not fair, it's like a proven theorem, well-proven theorem. Much more than this, but at least as a well-proven theorem. In mathematics, if the theorem is proven correctly, it will not become false.
Professor Rips, I'm Christian, and Jesus spoke about how we have to believe in a childlike way, in an innocent way as children. And a lot of this also has foundations, of course, in the Old Testament, in the Torah. And you have spoken about how modern man is very scornful of simple faith. But you stress that simple faith is actually scientifically correct. I found that fascinating that you had said that. It's very important to have simplicity in our heart when we approach our Creator in our belief, right?
It could be put simple. I think that on this level is okay.
Professor Rips, I wish we had 3, 4, 5, 6 hours still to discuss these things with you, and it would still not be enough. Just in the closing few minutes, why don't I just give you the floor? How would you like to end this discussion today?
Let me say it this way, that at least I ended up with a firm, in a sense, scientific knowledge that the beliefs of our forefathers are correct. Our heritage is correct. And just we have to try to live up to this standard that they left for us.
What an honor to be with you today, Professor Ips. Thank you so much for joining the Glazov Gang, and we hope to have you back on soon where we can more deeply explore these fascinating and profound issues. And thank you so much for coming on as well. I know this is very, I don't even know sometimes what words to use, but it's so complicated and mysterious that I know that it's also a challenge for you to get these issues across to our audience. But thank you for coming on today.
Thank you, and thank you to your listeners. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And thank you for joining the Glazov Gang this evening. We'll see you soon. Good night.